Here's an interesting marketing problem for you. Say your product has already reached 20% of small businesses in the US, but almost none of them know your company exists. That's the situation at fintech company Parafin. If a restaurant gets financing through DoorDash Capital or a studio gets it through Mindbody Capital, Parafin is the infrastructure powering that. But the brand sits behind someone else's name, so the usual build awareness playbook doesn't really apply. And I think this happens a lot in the fintech infrastructure space. So this was a really interesting episode to get into that particular kind of situation. Today, I'm talking to Gabrielle Bier, content and brand marketing lead at Parafin, about how you build a content strategy from zero when your product is invisible by design. Gabrielle has spent over a decade working in content to help scale brands like Parafin. She was the first content hire at Gong, where she operationalized the data-driven thought leadership that made their content famous, and she ran content at Middesk before joining Parafin. Parafin is a financial infrastructure company that lets platforms offer embedded financing to their small business customers, just like Mindbody and DoorDash, as I mentioned earlier. They funded more than 50,000 businesses and raised a 100 million Series C in 2024. In this episode, we talk about how she picked a term nobody owned yet, which was embedded capital, and got to page 1 of Google within her first month, why she's building for AEO first and how that overlaps with what already works for SEO, the mini committee she uses to get executives, data scientists into the content she produces, and her experience with X and how she's getting better results with X than some other platforms. This episode is another content case study, so we went really deep into the workings behind Parafin's content, so it was really fun on that aspect. So yeah, let's get into it. You're listening to the Fintech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Araminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. So the first question I want to ask is, you've recently done the switch to Parafin, and you went from Middesk, where you're targeting like compliance managers, and it's kind of a complex topic targeting people who are, as part of their job, to consume content, to now you're targeting more, I mean, you'll tell me, is it product or SaaS people? You can tell me, but like, how has that shift gone? And what have you seen as the biggest difference when it comes to like creating content for Parafin?
For sure. Yeah. I think the biggest difference in switch is just the mindset of the audience. I think product leaders are always thinking about what's possible, how they can create a better customer experience, launch new products, grow faster. And that kind of gives you more room to tell stories and paint a picture of where you think the industry is going, and then kind of aligning your brand with that narrative. And I think like something that I've really enjoyed at Parafin, we work with so many small businesses and we're really behind the financing there. So when you talk about a restaurant opening its second location or a contractor buying equipment to take on more jobs, it makes the impact of our product feel very real. And that's a cool thing to put in front of product leaders, just these tangible stories.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think you've got an interesting challenge at Parafin. I hadn't realized that I like this quote that I read, I think it was in an interview with your head of marketing, where your product has touched 20% of small businesses in the US, but people aren't aware of your brand because they don't use your brand name. So it's like Mindbody Capital or DoorDash Capital. You are the ones powering that. And I thought that was really interesting. And so, of course, I have to ask, like in this space where you're white label essentially and companies can't use your branding, what does that look like from a content perspective? You have awareness, but amongst like a really small niche of people, like how are you from a content perspective trying to get the word out and use that brand awareness?
For sure. I mean, I think our short-term goal is not necessarily to be a household name just yet, but to be a leader within our IP, like our platform audience and product teams and the executives at those types of companies that are ready to build out embedded financing products. For us, the content is how we are shaping our perspective and showing up in front of those people. So we focus on trying to own conversations around embedded finance, AI-powered underwriting, and what platforms can learn from the businesses that they're actually serving. And so if we can kind of consistently help people understand where the industry is headed and teach them something new, hopefully they start to associate those ideas with Parafin, even if we're operating behind the scenes. And then longer term, of course, I would love to roll out a community-led growth play where we are focused on the entrepreneurs that are the end users of Parafin and really trying to learn from their day-to-days and kind of be a space for them to collaborate and grow their businesses together.
So yeah, this is kind of what I want to focus on in this episode is what does content look like going from 0 to 1 when the brand, obviously you are established, but it's the brand awareness out wide that isn't there just yet. So I think that's really interesting. How do you think about like strategy then when you're targeting those kind of innovators at these companies, and how do you even reach them? Like how do they do their research? What are they looking for? Yeah, all that.
I think my first couple of months have been trying to knock out some foundational wins for Parafin. And like I said, own that kind of conversation around embedded financing, embedded lending, embedded capital, and really kind of educate the market on how Parafin shows up differently. I also think about content from two different perspectives. We're trying to earn the right to participate in the conversation by creating this foundational content that our audience might be searching for. And now they're likely searching for it via AI as opposed to traditional search. So I'm working with AEO tooling to identify which topics we should go after, which keywords need to be in our content, even outlining some of the content. But as far as publishing something directly from AI, I still am pretty hands-on in that sense. I want to maintain my editor-in-chief kind of status in this role, at least until I feel like it gets to a point where the deliverables could be like just hit publish upon getting a draft. I think the other component of our content, 0 to 1 content strategy, is also thinking about how we show up different than anyone else in our space. And that might be a company's proprietary data or just unique customer stories or insights around the product. And I think at Parafin, we have both a ton of small business data and small business stories, which gives us a really strong foundation for thought leadership. So if we're tackling and publishing a piece this week on embedded lending, but I'm using real stories that are anonymized to give color to how Parafin and embedded lending actually works. So that's something I always think about is just how we earn the right to show up in the conversation, but then also what's different about us that we can really bring to the table.
So would you say that, like currently, what is the role of content for Parafin? Is it mostly increase brand awareness? Is it more educate? What would you say is the objective currently?
It's a combination of the two. I would say in terms of educating search opportunities and really trying to capture and own keywords that there isn't necessarily a ton of content around. So it is a little bit of category creation at the same time. For instance, something that I published my first month at Parafin was a definitive guide on embedded capital. And that topic hadn't really been owned by anyone at all. So I kind of looked at different thought leaders internally, captured their kind of insights around how we do things differently at Parafin and how that kind of translates to embedded capital, and then published this long form piece. And it's already the first ranking piece on that keyword, and also like showing up in AI search as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think we've worked with a few embedded banking companies, and I just know that it's such a niche area, right? There's a limited set of keywords and topics that you can write about, I guess. So how are you prioritizing those? And is your goal to just own all of them and then whatever comes next? Or what is your objective, or how are you thinking about like those specific in such a niche kind of area?
When I joined, the blog was super lean. There was no thought leadership on it. So right now it's kind of making our mark and putting a flag down. The way that I'm prioritizing things is what is the lowest hanging fruit opportunity. For instance, in embedded capital, there was nothing. So let's just put a stake in the ground. And then now it's like embedded lending. There's some room for us to kind of own that. And so that's what I'm kind of focused on next. And I think these will amount to that broader embedded finance category, because that is a very saturated space. But the more that we can do kind of like specific to what our product does and who we're working with, the more traction I think we'll have in that embedded finance kind of play.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, I mean, this is very much the foundation of our bottom of the funnel thinking as well. You've already got people out there actively doing research, money in their hand, looking for a solution. start with those people and then work your way up the funnel, right? If not, you're competing with a lot of other interests when you're at the top of the funnel. So it makes sense to start at the bottom, and then your results will be quicker, sooner as well. And then it's easier to go up funnel as well.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. I think in parallel, it's kind of like, how are we thinking about our brand and how we want to actually show up in that broader space too? And so like, as I've been knocking out these kind of foundational pieces, I'm also thinking about, okay, what kind of data storytelling series could we publish in a few months? And what kind of maybe small business video profiles could we also highlight? And like have this kind of bigger play kind of working, growing, so that we have this repository of content to kind of go live with once we already have some credibility in this kind of more narrow scope.
Yeah, exactly. Are you going to experiment with other types of content or other distribution channels? I don't know, like video or LinkedIn. What else have you been experimenting with from a content perspective?
Definitely video. We have been doing some tests internally of what we can do with AI video too, just because we don't have to source talent or coordinate schedules or get a video production team. But then also we do have some customer testimonial videos in partnership with some of our platforms that we do partner with that we're working on. And I think it is really those merchant stories that kind of add a ton of color to our content strategy. So video will become a huge component for us in the near future. Additionally, I think as we're kind of growing our content repository on the website, we'll probably build out a dedicated resource center where we can have gated content and see how that kind of plays out. It's a blank space environment for me right now to test things out. So that's kind of cool. But then at the same time, it's like there's so much room to experiment and get signal. So I've just kind of been focusing on what I know works and then going after experimental avenues.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I think what I find in this space, embedded lending, embedded invoice financing, it's often companies, when they see their competitors do something like this, they're like, oh gosh, we have to do it. And that's why I imagine merchant stories or customer or case studies, you want to embed that as well in your content, embed everything. But yeah, I imagine that's like a key part, right, as well, of like increasing awareness and conversion.
Yeah, and being different, because all of those stories are unique. And something that I've tried to do for a quick win is we have a lot of compliance regulatory review for our content in order for it to go out. But there is a way you can anonymize things so that you can showcase the color that's actually there in those stories, but then move fast with it and ship fast. So for instance, we have over 650 Trustpilot reviews, and those are our merchants that are receiving capital from Parafin, even if it's white labeled as something else. And those are like the hard-hitting stories where it's like, I was in a tough situation, I got capital fast, now my business has 3x growth or whatever. And so like aggregating those and creating thought leadership around that has been a fun part of my role in the most recent era, the last week or so. But I'm definitely trying to get creative and be scrappy when it comes to like finding these unique moments for us to show up. And then ultimately, I think that will serve our AEO strategy well, because it's real life examples. Like Reddit is often cited quite frequently on AI search. And so like something like that could potentially work for us pretty well.
Nice. Yeah, I want to touch on AEO later because I think that's interesting that you're focusing so much on that. Another interesting challenge that you've got two customers, right? Two types of customers. You've got the enterprise, so like a DoorDash or a MindBody, who is kind of, I guess, the intermediator or the solution that the SaaS or the merchant uses. And then you've obviously got the small business at the end, the SaaS, the small business. So how do you think about that from a content perspective? Who are you mostly trying to target? And does the content change depending on who? Like, how are you targeting both?
I think we're lucky that our product is quite technical. And so it's kind of like finding a balance between showing what the product can do to attract that more technical buyer, but then also like the stories, the actual merchant stories too, that could resonate with just about anyone. And so like we could write about how our underwriting model works and how that could serve an engineer potentially evaluating our API. But then if you also frame it around what that underwriting model means for a small business getting access to capital and how inclusive it is and how easy it is for someone to receive capital, then it might land for a broader business audience as well. So that's also like, I think in terms of deliverables, I'm kind of striking a balance between hyper-tech blogs that our engineering team or data science team might pen with this go-to-market, more business-oriented thought leadership that explains things on a less technical level and also like the outcome of what these kinds of, or what our product does provide. So it's a constant finding balance, but it makes our content dynamic and it makes my job really interesting.
And how, because you can't work directly with small businesses, right? So are you saying that then an enterprise, if they read a merchant story, that also helps with the kind of acquiring them? Is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah, because I think product teams are thinking about customer experience. Those merchants are the customers. Or like if they're seeing their lives being made easier, I think it makes it easier for then a product team to want to be like, oh, we want to offer this sort of capability to our end user as well.
Yeah, I guess so you can capture them. They're doing research on embedded lending, embedded capital. You capture them by going into technical details. And then in there, you've got like maybe a merchant story that kind of shows that. Yeah, okay, nice. Yeah, very cool. That's so interesting. You mentioned that you write quite technical content. I've seen that you've got a product and engineering blog. Is that the one that you're talking about when you say technical?
And for that, I am not the subject matter expert.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That's where I lean on our internal team. Our founders they both have very technical backgrounds. Our CEO is a data scientist at Robinhood. So they have that editorial eye for knowing like what we want to talk about and how we want to talk about it. So perhaps a data scientist will draft something, and then as part of editorial review, I'll loop in our executives just to like kind of give that where I would normally step in, that kind of final sign off on our content. And there's lots of room for that. I'm in the process of just like adding more and more of those technical pieces to our editorial calendar, just because it's so core to, I think, our brand long term and how we'll be recognized.
Yeah, no, because I was reading them and I was like, wow, this is really, I like it. It's very in-depth. So I wanted to ask, so you're not writing them. So it's a data scientist who does the writing and then you edit them? What is the process for putting them together?
A data scientist or an engineer or product manager will come up with the initial draft and they'll share it with, I'll put together like a little committee for review. So potentially an executive, usually our CEO, he's very hands-on with the content that we do ship. And he'll review it. I'll do like a final review for grammar and fluidity, and then also the keyword side of things, making sure it's good for SEO, AEO. And then we'll work with our designers. It'll also go through legal and compliance review, and then we will ship things out. In terms of distribution, I think we've been experimenting a little bit. Well, we're really starting to like focus on experimenting on X, just because that technical audience.
Interesting.
Yeah, that technical audience is there. Even I was talking to some of our engineers and they're like, that's how we find out like about our jobs or just the industry, or like that's how we're like engaging in conversations. It's like how you think about LinkedIn has been for the last decade plus. It's like X is where it's at for the more technical audience. We're doubling down on our social strategy there. The last tech blog we published on our Paraformer, I also published it as an X article, and we had, I think, like 600 times our impressions that we normally receive, just because it was like a new surface for us. And I think it was something that was highly searchable. And so that's something we're going to continue to experiment with. It's putting me outside of my comfort zone because I've been a LinkedIn marketer for the last decade plus. And going back to X, I haven't been on it since it was Twitter. So it'll be cool to keep trying things out there, and definitely collaborating with our product and engineering team to make sure that we're showing up in all the right ways on X.
That's great. I know people listening might. So I think it's great that you've got a data scientist, your technical people doing the writing. What I've heard is that this is often quite hard to get done because they're very busy and all of that. And that's why we'll always say, if they're not going to write it, you can interview them and then write. That's another like way to do it. How did you encourage the data scientists and the technical people to do the writing? Or is this something that came from above and it was like, okay, now it's part of your job? How did that work?
I think I was lucky in the last couple of instances where the drafts were handed to me and just are so excited about what they're building that it was just, and we now have like tooling like Claude where it's easy to just like jot down your thoughts, get a draft ready, and then we can refine. And so that helps expedite things, just having AI to help with that initial draft. But then also now I'm in a position where we want to do more of this. So I will definitely be kind of pitching to our internal team members being like, hey, I heard you had an interesting experience with this. Can I either interview you or can you spin up a draft for me? And I'm going to test out and see what works. I'm happy at this point to like go and help facilitate the content creation. But honestly, our team is so like AI first, so like deeply rooted in Claude at this point that I feel like them spinning up a draft is just like a 30-minute kind of project for them.
Interesting. I'm curious to see which one you find works best, because the issue I have found with people, like technical people using Claude or ChatGPT, is that then it's quite hard to parse between the nuggets and the stuff that's just fluff. Because you know how Claude and these tools are, right? Everything just becomes fluff if you don't give it a lot of direction. So maybe if they're really good at prompting it, it could be really good. But I'd be worried that it's all fluff, and then you're like, okay, but where's the insight? Whereas I guess an interview you can, or even if they just whisper flow, right? Even if they just talk to their Google Doc or whatever, and it just gives out bullets, that's also fantastic, right? So I'm curious to see what comes out, what you find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I think all of our tech blogs are very granular in terms of the content that we're sharing and the processes that we're digging into. And so that's what I think kind of counterbalances the AI fluff, is that we are like so specific around how we're doing things, like step by step, or just the way that they're thinking about things. So that's helping us at this point. But yeah, if it's something we want to scale, I could definitely see that becoming a bigger issue.
Sure. Yeah. So then onto like more sales and tracking and all of this. Are you also trying to encourage the sales team to use this in your content? Or what do you think is the role of your content here in the sales cycle? And how does your sales team use it?
As I've gotten more and more, I guess, like situated in my role, I have worked more and more closely with our sales org. And like I said, we do kind of like a mini committee of editorial review for each and every piece that we publish. And so I'll often loop in our head of sales or an AE or an account manager to do review of my content before shipping, just because they have that frontline kind of knowledge of how platforms are talking about things. And I also want to make sure at this point, we are a 3-person marketing team. I want to make sure that the content that I'm producing could serve as almost mid-funnel and help with getting a deal across the finish line. So yeah, I lean on them heavily just to make sure everything is resonating and that there are relevant topics that we're actually shipping, and that even our editorial calendar is aligned with, target accounts. And then in terms of distribution, I try to make it as easy as possible to share our content out. I post in Slack as soon as something ships with to our X post or in our LinkedIn post. I also provide templates so that they can copy, paste, and publish. I think we're shopping around for like an employee advocacy tool so that process can be streamlined a bit further. And I'm always on deck to enable our team to share on LinkedIn, because I think I've had a lot of success in previous roles where the personal brands really amplify the core company brand. So anything I can do to help there, that's what I'm signing up for.
Right, especially if they're experts in their field and they have connections, and even if they don't post that often, content that's coming from the expert can land a lot more than the marketer or maybe someone who doesn't have the connections with the product people or your target audience, right? So I think there's a really big advantage there. I really like what you say about mini committee. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like you put together like someone from sales, someone from product, someone from somewhere else, and then you, I don't know, is it on top of the Google Doc, something like that? And you're like, okay, everyone needs to review. How does that process work?
Yeah, no, it is literally like a TLDR for reviewers, and then it breaks down who will use it by when. It depends on the article. If it's something like I just published a piece, like I mentioned, on embedded lending, where I was looking at different merchant use cases, how much of a cash advance they were receiving and what they were using it for. That was like, I had our CEO review it because he loves that type of content, and I really wanted his sign off before publishing. It was the first one we'd ever published in that kind of way before. And then legal compliance, because we're talking about merchant stories. Even though they're anonymized, I want to make sure that we're not saying anything in the wrong way. But if it's something like I did a piece on what is a B2B buy now, pay later, and what does it mean for platforms, that I had a committee where I was thinking about the account executives that were in BNPL kind of sales cycles and kind of offering that as like as a solution for platforms. So I leaned on 2 of our account executives for that to review my initial draft before then sharing it with our sales leader, and also the typical kind of like legal and compliance kind of review. But it just depends on what the topic is at hand, and that will determine kind of the breadth of the committee. But I think at this point, because content marketing is so new for Parafin, each and every post that we're publishing does have some sort of committee involved.
Nice. Oh, that's great. But it also enables buy-in, I think, a little bit. Like when everyone's part of the process, then it's more exciting when you see leads, when you see rankings. It's like, okay, we're a lot more involved. So no, I think that's a great
No, it's cool. And then we have like an internal recognition tool as well. So like if someone did help me with the content, it's called Nectar. So I'll give them Nectar points for their contribution. I love this part of Parafin because I feel like oftentimes I'm in content roles where I'm just shipping by myself on my own little island and just trying to do quantity over quality. At Parafin, it really is quality over quantity.
I think, honestly, this is what differentiates companies nowadays when it comes to content, because it's just so easy to do quantity right now with AI. And if you've got a prospect, especially in your space where the sales cycles are super long, these are multi 6-7 figure deals, right? Just when they click on a blog or an article, if that's the first point of contact and it's like AI slop, how are they going to, what does that tell them about the brand? So I think having something that's so in depth, it's clear that multiple people in the team have worked on this. What does it tell you about the company? It tells you these are serious people, they care. And if they put so much work into their content, chances are they will with their product as well. So I always see that content is like a proxy for the product. And so I think companies, the approach that you're taking is definitely the one that works nowadays when it comes to AI, because of AI and all this stuff. So
yeah, no, I want to try and maintain it as long as I can. It'll be interesting when it does come to the like, oh, we want to do more content.
More.
Yeah.
I know this is a never ending question, and it's something that we're trying to figure out as well. And I think there are ways to scale carefully while maintaining quality and with AI, but you just have to be very careful. It has to be quite slow and steady. You can't go from 0 to 100 a month in 1 month, right? It has to be like slow and steady, but there are ways. It's just everyone's still figuring that out, I would say, for sure. So how does, from a like lead generation or the results that you can see from this, what have you seen so far? I know it's early days, but like, do you feel like content plays a role in that? How are you tracking the results of content? Any wins that you can share so far?
Yeah, I mean, I am focused on top of funnel awareness. So I'm looking at, are we growing reach? Are we showing up in search for people who are already looking for us? So like non-branded search, volume, impressions, LinkedIn reach. But now I'm like, okay, what's happening on X? And so that's going to be definitely something I dig into in the next quarter or two is like how we are showing up on social media. But yeah, it's really just those kind of core, kind of top of funnel metrics. And then also who's coming to our website? How much time are they spending on it? Are they going to multiple blog posts when they're on our website? Are they ultimately filling out a demo request form? I can pay close attention to all of that. I've put together kind of like a higher level dashboard for our executive team. So then I update it on a monthly basis at this point, just because our volume is like 1 blog post a week because it is such a thorough process. So I update on a monthly basis, share it out with them so that they can get a deeper view of how content is performing. I think in terms of measuring success, it's something we'll continue to refine as our content strategy scales.
Yeah. Would you say that eventually the objective is obviously brand awareness, but is it also like, how can we influence the sales cycle more? Like, for example, I've interviewed people from Pleo, from Unit, and they each have their own stats, but it could be things like people who read more than, so Pleo, for example, had this really interesting stat. People who read more than 3 articles are 80% more likely to close. Like things like this. It's probably too early stage for that right now, but like, do you feel that is where you want to go, where you can track and show? And
definitely. And we're bringing on a demand gen counterpart in the coming week. And so I think between the two of us, we'll be able to build out processes for attribution in that way. I think just knowing how closely aligned I am with the sales org, those kinds of metrics will be critical because they're leaning on our content right now, like as a primary source of just like making sure prospects have more information about us. So I'm excited to think about where that could go and how we could share metrics like that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and it's so crucial because I feel like so many times content marketing, as you've said before, like it can be seen as just kind of the fun, the nice part. It's not super necessary, but regularly we see when content is done well, it can be the main growth driver of a company. We have 2 or 3 companies where the work that we're doing, the main way that they acquire customers, there's no other channel. And content marketing can do that. But the hard part is showing or demonstrating that, which can be hard because especially from a brand awareness perspective, like you can't track every single time someone's going to read a piece of content. So
totally.
It's one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, I know. That's why I think this foundational work is so important right now, because it's setting up not only just our credibility, but then also like processes so that we can move faster in the future. And I had an experience being the first content person at Gong where content became synonymous with the Gong brand. And that's something I would love to replicate for Parafin, especially, or just in the fintech world. Like Parafin's content is where I go to learn about X, Y, and Z. And so,
yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's true. Gong, I remember multiple years ago, I think, was it the LinkedIn? Gong's LinkedIn page was like the place people would go. It was very good.
And that started in this foundational content series that I kind of came in and operationalized, where we took our data and created unique sales thought leadership around insights from Gong. And so the power of like proprietary data storytelling is something that I stress to any content marketer that I come across. And that was a big selling point for me at coming to Parafin, was just knowing, oh my gosh, I have all this data around SMB growth and things that I can look into. So I'm very excited to flex that muscle and start with the data storytelling side of things in the future.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a bit about AEO strategies. So it sounds like this is a key focus right now for you. How are you thinking about LLMs, AEO? How are you trying to get the content, or how are you influencing LLMs, and how are you using content for that?
It's funny how the checklist that you would implement for an SEO blog is very similar to what you would implement with an AEO blog. So it's more so shaping, when I'm writing something, I want to think about like, if someone were to ask a question in Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity, like, am I answering it in a way that is credible and something that they can take to their teams when they're making a decision? And so I look a lot at the prompts within, I use Profound, the tooling there. So then the prompts that it identifies within a certain topic are kind of how I shape the outline of an article. It's something that has become ingrained heavily into my day-to-day, and even thinking about the blogs that we are creating, or the written content that we're creating with external teams outside of marketing, like how can I take that and then also replug that into this kind of AEO strategy that we're building. And then from there, building out the outline around the prompts that we want to answer. It's been fascinating to try and like think about this is like a driving strategy, but we have to. There's no other way. And thankfully, because of the overlap with how things rank from an SEO standpoint, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone in a nice way.
Totally. You said you call it an AEO blog. So what is the difference between an SEO and an AEO blog? Like, how do you think about the two?
There is so much similarities. I think it is just those prompts that we're looking at and using as our H2 text almost. And I think from an SEO standpoint, like we make sure the keyword is in it. But then from an AEO standpoint, we're making sure it's phrased in a way that,
cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting. This sounds very similar to our strategy as well. We call it GPT articles. Yeah. So what we do is, it sounds like similar to what you do, which is decide on the prompts beforehand. We start with bottom of funnel prompts specifically. So prompts where they're actively looking for a solution, because then that means that your name's actually going to turn up, right? If you just look up something like, what is embedded capital, for example, it's just going to have the answer, but they're not going to mention Parafin, right? So it doesn't make sense to target. So we start with the bottom of the funnel prompts, and then for each prompt, we create a separate piece. And that's how we've been doing it. So it sounds like it's quite similar to yours. Is that how you do it?
100%. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I love it.
Yeah. And that's funny because I wasn't like necessarily following a process I had heard of before. It's just,
I mean, this is we made it up as well. It's funny because when AI overviews and LLMs came out, everyone's like, oh my God, content is dead. No one needs it anymore. And actually it's just become more important because it's the main way to appear on LLMs. So it's quite funny how, just create a lot of content around a topic and then you'll start appearing. How have the results been for you? Has it worked quite well?
Yeah, I mean, like for those kind of keywords where there are topics where there aren't a ton of content to begin with, like embedded capital, that has just been a very fast win for us. And I think it's kind of, I don't know if it works this way, but it's gotten like the LLMs to pay attention to, or what we're saying, what we're producing. And I'm excited to see how our embedded lending piece performs because it has those kind of real world examples. And so it's just a different take on explaining that type of content. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, nice, really cool. So I do have to ask about AI, of course. It's everyone's going on about it, especially for content and marketing. What are some ways that you've been implementing it into your workflow? It sounds like you really care a lot about quality, which is great. Maybe experts are using it to help put their thoughts on paper. What are some other ways you found that it can really help with content production?
AI has allowed me to prototype really quickly and come up with ideas really quickly that I could present as like bigger picture campaigns to leadership. And it doesn't just live like rent free in my head. It's just like something I can like produce and visualize and have on paper. But that, and then also I think writing has become a much quicker kind of task too, especially with tooling that connects to where all of your important information lives, like Google Drive and Notion, and just like being able to extract things from there. So if I'm writing something and I'm missing an insight, I can be like, hey, is there anything in Slack that talks about how a merchant received or a merchant took out 12 advances or something like that? And it can pull that actual like concrete example and point me to something where I can cite it as I'm writing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's such a great use case to get better insights. So I imagine we are to expect quite a few reports and stuff with some original data, right?
Yeah. We're still like ironing out like the process there, but that's definitely the plan for sure.
Yeah, nice. Pretty cool. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle. So I have one last question for you, which is what piece of content are you proudest of? And it can be multiple, but at Parafin, what are you proudest of creating?
I mean, I think just having this, like we just talked about, this fast, quick win with like choosing a topic, writing high quality content around it, and then seeing it show up, that what is embedded capital piece and why platforms need it now. Just a simple, definitive guide, but really well researched, and had a committee that was kind of like overseeing the production of it and signing off on it. I think just shipping that as my first article and then already like being on page 1 of Google. I remember like celebrating that like internally on Slack. And yeah, I think more of that is to come, and I'm excited for that. And then I would love to chat in a year when we have some more diversified content in place and talk about those. But I think just having a quick win right off the bat was awesome.
Yeah, I think there's really an opportunity there because I think, first of all, having a topic where there's not much that's being talked about, but also the space that you're in. I've seen content work super well in this space where it's like complex, multi-month, year sales cycle, where you're targeting multiple people, right? In a sense, like there's a whole board of or committee of people. And this is where content really shines. So I'm excited to see what you do at Parafin, and I'll keep my eyes out for like reports and unique insights on the space.
More
I think that's
visual.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, visuals, actually, we haven't talked about that, but maybe we could talk about it when we catch up again in a year.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can tell me about that. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, thank you so much, Gabrielle, for jumping on. This has been really insightful, and thanks for going into so mumuch detail. And yeah, hopefully we can catch up and you can tell us how's it going later on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and yeah, it's a great combo.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to Orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you at the next episode.